The night at Ranch Lake was still and wide, the kind of silence that felt alive. The moonlight spilled across the water, silver ripples bending and breaking against the shoreline. Somewhere in the trees, crickets kept up their endless song, and a faint breeze tugged at the canvas of a single tent pitched right at the edge of the lake. James Henderson sat by the fire pit, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, staring into the water. It wasn't just a camping trip for him. It was a reunion with the land, with his family's history, with himself. This was his ranch. His father had left it to him, and his grandfather had left it to his father. The lake, the woods, the open acres of land, this was not just dirt and trees. It was legacy. As a boy, James remembered fishing with his dad right here, remembered falling asleep to the crackle of the same fire pit. Life had pulled him to the city for years. But now, after so much noise, so much distance, he wanted nothing more than to breathe this air again. What he didn't know was that by the next morning, what was meant to be peace would become confrontation. 2 miles away, in a quiet cul-de-sac of new suburban homes, 3 members of the homeowners association sat in a white SUV parked at the overlook. They had binoculars, they had cell phones, and they had a certainty that they were protecting something that belonged to them. "Look at him," the woman in the passenger seat muttered. "Who camps out here? It's suspicious." The man behind the wheel leaned forward. "Doesn't matter. He doesn't look like he belongs. I say we call it in." The third, a man with a trimmed beard, nodded. "We can't have strangers just setting up camp by the lake. It sets a precedent. Next thing you know, anyone will think they can use it." The phone was already out, fingers dialing 911. 911, what's your emergency?" "Yes, hi. There's a man camping by the lake near our community. He doesn't appear to be a resident. He's black, and he's got a whole tent set up. We feel unsafe. Can you send someone out here?" The call ended. Relief washed over them as if they'd just checked off a task on their HOA agenda. They didn't know, or perhaps didn't care, that the land wasn't theirs. The lake, the soil, the very clearing where James had pitched his tent was part of Henderson Ranch, deed and all. They were the ones trespassing. At dawn, James heard it, a wailing siren cutting through the stillness. He rose quickly, setting his mug down, scanning the horizon. 2 patrol cars barreled down the dirt path, lights flashing, kicking up clouds of dust behind them. James stood up, both hands raised, trying to look non-threatening. He knew the world well enough to sense what this might look like to others. The first officer stepped out, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Sir, can you explain what you're doing here?" His voice carried the edge of authority, not inquiry. James frowned. "I'm camping. On my ranch. Is there a problem?" The officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "We received a complaint that someone was trespassing on private property. Residents reported a suspicious individual." James blinked, incredulous. "Private property? Officer, this is my property. I own this ranch. Been in my family for 3 generations. The second officer glanced at the tent. Then at James. "Do you have proof of ownership on you?" James laughed softly, a humorless sound. "You mean, do I carry land deeds in my pocket when I camp?" "No, but I can show you the house. I can show you the boundary markers. This is mine." By now, the white SUV had pulled up. The HOA trio stepping out, smugness plastered across their faces. "That's him," the woman said, pointing. "We told you. He doesn't live here. He doesn't belong here." James felt his chest tighten. He took a slow breath, forcing calm into his voice. "You don't even know who I am. You don't know anything about this land." The silence after. James's words felt heavier than the sound of the sirens had been. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. They weren't here to referee a property dispute, at least not one this messy. But the scene had become exactly that. The HOA president, a stocky man with neatly combed gray hair, stepped forward, puffing himself up like a rooster. "Officers, you don't need to listen to this nonsense. This land has been part of our community for as long as anyone can remember. He's just making things up to justify squatting here." James clenched his jaw. "Squatting?" His voice sharpened. "You're calling me a squatter on my own land? Then prove it," the woman from the SUV shot back. "Where are your papers, your ID?" "Anybody can spin a story. For all we know, you broke in here." The younger officer scribbled in his notepad, while the older one gestured for calm. "All right, let's slow this down. What's your name, sir?" Henderson, James said. James Henderson. The name hung there for a beat. The HOA members stiffened, but none of them spoke. James noticed it, the flicker in their eyes. They had heard that name before. My grandfather, Samuel Henderson, bought this ranch in 1962, James continued, his voice steady now. Back then, this lake was just a stretch of wild land. My family cleared trails, built fences, and paid every tax that's ever come due. I grew up right here, learned to fish off that dock. He pointed toward the worn planks jutting into the lake. The younger officer frowned. You're saying this whole property is yours? Including the lake? Yes, James said. Every acre of it. I've got the deeds at my house. Not here in a tent. But I can drive you there right now if you'll allow me. The HOA president scoffed. This is ridiculous. Everyone in the neighborhood knows the lake is community property. We've maintained it. We've landscaped it. You've trespassed, James cut in sharply. You've acted like it was yours because you assumed nobody would challenge you. My family hasn't lived on site in a while, so you took advantage. You threw your barbecues on this shore. You organized your little cleanups to make it look official. But not once did you ask for permission. You knew this was private. The woman crossed her arms, glaring. If it was so important to you, why weren't you here all these years? James inhaled, slow and deliberate. Because I was serving in the army, because I was working 2 jobs to keep up with the property taxes. Your association never had to worry about, and because I didn't think. I'd come back to find my land stolen out from under me. Not with paperwork, but with arrogance. The older officer cleared his throat. All right, here's what we'll do. Mr. Henderson, you say you have documents at your house. Can you retrieve them? I can, James said, though his chest tightened. He didn't like the implication, as if his word meant nothing until proven. The HOA president interrupted again. Officers, this isn't necessary. He's lying. If you let him go, he'll just disappear. Probably some drifter who picked up the name Henderson off an old mailbox. James turned on him, eyes flashing. You want to know how I know this is mine? That dock out there, under the planks. My father carved our initials into the wood when I was 10, SH and JH, check it yourself. The younger officer raised a brow. He walked to the dock, crouched down, and ran his hand along the underside of the weathered boards. A moment later, he straightened, glancing back toward the group. They're here, he said quietly. The initials Henderson. For the first time, the HOA members faltered. At his farmhouse a mile away, James dug through the old oak cabinet where his father kept every legal paper. His hands trembled as he pulled out the worn envelope, yellowed from decades. Inside was the original deed, signed and stamped, detailing every boundary line, including the lake. He set it on the table, exhaling a long breath. For a moment, the weight of memory replaced the sting of humiliation. He could see his father's hands sliding those papers into the envelope years ago, telling him, one day you'll have to protect this place. James hadn't known it would come to this. That neighbors would try to erase his family's name with a phone call. That officers would doubt him before believing. That his presence would be seen as suspicious on land, where his roots ran deeper than any of theirs. He slipped the documents into a folder, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about a lake. It was about legacy, and he was done letting others write over it. The air at Ranch Lake felt charged, as if the storm clouds had gathered without a sound. Residents stood in clusters, arms folded, eyes darting between James Henderson, the officers, and the HOA board who had summoned the chaos in the first place. James held the folder of deeds tight in his grip. He wasn't just holding papers. He was holding his family's history, his right to stand. Here without question. The officers positioned themselves at the center, raising their hands for quiet. All right, folks, the older officer began, his voice carrying across the water. We've reviewed the documents. Mr. Henderson is, in fact, the legal owner of this ranch and the lake. His family has held the deed since 1962. This property is not, and never has been, part of the HOA. Murmurs broke out immediately. Some residents gasped, others frowned, and a few looked down at their shoes in shame. James watched the HOA president's face pale. The woman beside him clenched her fists, as if willing the truth to disappear. The bearded man avoided eye contact altogether. A few residents began whispering among themselves. One woman stepped forward, clutching her son's hand. Mr. Henderson, she said carefully, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Nobody ever told us this was private land. We just thought it was part of the neighborhood. James studied her face. There was sincerity there, regret. He nodded once. You didn't know because your leaders didn't care to tell you. He turned, staring directly at the HOA president. They built their authority on lies, and when those lies were challenged, they tried to erase me. The president's mouth opened, then closed again. For once, he had no defense. James lifted the folder, holding the deeds high for everyone to see. This land is Henderson Ranch. My family bled for it, worked for it, and preserved it. You can't rewrite that. You can't take it from me with assumptions or phone calls. Today, it ends. No more trespassing. No more barbecues, no more parties, no more treating my property like it belongs to you. If you want to use this land, you'll ask. And if I say no, you'll respect that. That's how ownership works. The officers nodded in agreement. He's within his rights, the older one confirmed. This is settled. Some residents looked uneasy, but others clapped softly. A ripple of applause spread, hesitant but growing, until the sound echoed across the lake. James wasn't sure if they were applauding him or applauding the resolution of the conflict. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth had been spoken and finally heard. That night, James sat by the fire pit once more, the same mug of coffee warming his hands. The day had been long, draining, but necessary. He thought of his grandfather, of the initials carved into the dock, of the countless moments that tied his family to this soil. He imagined his father's voice. One day, you'll have to protect this place. That day had come, and he had done it. For the first time in years, James felt a peace deeper than silence. Not just because the land was his, but because he had claimed it openly, in the face of those who tried to deny it. Ranch Lake wasn't just a story about property lines. It was a mirror held up to the assumptions people carry, the quickness with which some decide who belongs and who doesn't. James Henderson had the papers to prove his case, but not everyone does. Too often, the burden of proof falls hardest on those least believed. If you read this and feel a spark of discomfort, good. Ask yourself, when you see someone who doesn't look like they belong, do you reach for the phone or do you reach for the truth? Do you stand with what's right, even if it challenges the story you've always been told? Because belonging isn't decided by assumptions. It's decided by respect, and respect is a choice every one of us has to make. The next time you think about who belongs somewhere, remember Ranch Lake, remember James Henderson, and remember that sometimes the trespassers aren't the ones in the tent, but the ones who called the cops in the first place.